Caddis Maximus here, this time with just a quick review and overview, or maybe not so quick, of the BenzOmatic original ST100 gas butane cordless soldering iron. They've revised this a couple of times. I believe they're up to the ST500 or the ST550 with the kit. Some people have had hit or miss issues, and really what I've noticed is it's just how you use the tool and being kind of aware of how it's supposed to properly be used. I found these tools to be absolutely invaluable, and as far as unreliability, I've read some issues about this. This thing has been absolutely reliable. As you can see, I've definitely put some hours on this. I've just been really careful not to drop it, not just because it's a hot tool, but because you realize it's just a basic butane torch lighter, just in a kind of a special format. And so you do want to be careful with those things. Otherwise, it's been tremendously reliable and incredibly handy. Now, one of the biggest reasons to have one of these is the fact that when you're trying to solder, most soldering irons, if you just get a small one of those orange-handled Wellers or something like that, are going to be around 25 watts, which work just fine when you're working with small electronic circuits such as this, and I'll demonstrate this unit in a little bit here. But when you start working on thicker, heavier connections, say automotive, or maybe you're doing some brazing using solder, or maybe even brazing some small copper tubing that may be, for an air conditioning system or something like that, what's really nice about these butane units is that you get a whole bunch of heat because you're working directly with the burning gas. So I'd say this easily has the equivalent power of a 50 watt to 100 watt soldering iron. So that's what's really nice about it, is you can use it for finer electronics work, but then be able to generate enough heat to potentially solder, large alternator cables and any kind of situations where you're doing larger diameter wires. There's been electronics that I've repaired where they've actually had blade fuses that were set right into circuit boards, and surprisingly enough, a 25 watt soldering iron has almost no chance of getting a blade fuse desoldered from a circuit board, because the blade fuse itself offers enough extra mass where it just saps it all away from the soldering iron. You're having to hold the iron onto the component for a long time just to get it to heat up, potentially damaging it. So you really want a lot of energy in soldering iron so that when you apply it to the solder, that it can just deliver the BTUs that are necessary to easily melt the solder and to quickly, remove or install or tin or do whatever you're doing. So in addition to that, we'll take a closer look. The BenzOmatic seems to be pretty well built. They have it's a metal body here. You can remove the valve if you have any issues with the filling valve. The one criticism is it doesn't have an integrated electric start, so you still have to use a good old lighter to get it started, or maybe a welding sparker or something like that will also get it started. You just have a basic on-off switch here. You have a power level, which fuel level, which doesn't vary by a whole lot, and it does have a nice integrated stand. It seems to stay up really well. It doesn't fold out the best, but it's actually very necessary because you can easily stand it up. Oh, and another thing about the gas versus even electric or anything cordless is that you get tons of power, and it only takes as long to recharge as it does to take one of those bottles and just fill it back up. So how this works is it has an interchangeable tip, and this thing is pretty hot, so I'm going to be careful. This is a welding apron that I've been using as a table here, so it is fire resistant. So this is just a torch lighter with special adapters, and they've done a lot of engineering work. It seems to work pretty nice. They have a nice little brass bits in there. There's a little spring. The whole deal with this spring, and you'll see in a minute, is how you get the thing properly lit, as well as making sure there's not too much pressure placed onto the end of this. But if we light it up, we can see that it's just a regular old, and we turn off the lights here. See, it's just a regular torch lighter in there. We can turn it up and we can turn it down. One thing I have noticed is that when you turn off the switch, there seems to be a little bit of residual gas that's in the system, and so it takes it sometimes a second or two for the flame to go out, and just to be aware of that. Don't just it will be hot, so you won't immediately put it in the case anyway, but it's just something to be aware of. So how it works is that you have a soldering head. If you're not using the torch tip, you have this soldering head, and this slides over the end of it, and this is actually pretty hot right now as I was testing it out. But you have a soldering head, and then inside here, I don't know if we can really see You can kind of see, but there's like a catalytic converter type grid inside, ceramic grid right near the top of this thing. And that what that grid does is as you light the lighter, the grid heats up, and then you kind of do this, and I'll show you in a second. That's what actually is burning the flame and provides a great radiant heater that is directly attached to the tip. So I have an electronics tip here to demonstrate. But this little kit actually came with several different tips, two of which that I've used. One is the fine electronic tip. We have another coarser, kind of heavier duty electronic tip right here. And I've used this one quite a bit. It's been very handy on heavier connections. We have even a larger tip right here that you might use for light soldering sheet metal together, or real heavy terminals if you're doing electrical work. And then this one, which I assume is like for copper tubing. I've never really seen a soldering tip that was a wedge like this. And I think it's kind of interesting. If somebody knows what that tip is supposed to be used for, please let me know in the comments. Anyway, the operation is pretty simple. You'd have your tip. These little tips, these actual soldering tips, screw into the adapter just by hand. That's all you need. And then the adapter slides over the end of the torch and then onto this little nut here. How this nut, they prevent that nut from turning, is that there's this brass inner piece and it has two flats on it which match that. So you just push the collar down, and as you screw it, it kind of draws that up. So you wonder, well, why is this on a spring-loaded connection? Well, that's how you actually get the thing started. Is you turn on the gas, you take your thumb and open the window so you can actually get the internal flame going. The second thing you do is you just need to keep that flame kind of on. Sometimes I turn it up higher, and we'll see if we can. We'll turn off the light. So you can see the catalyst starting to get hot in there. So you'll hold this open until the catalyst gets hot, and then you just drop it down. And you can see what's happening is that the catalyst is now actually what's burning the flame. And you can see it's actually pretty bright, and I'm going to turn it down. And so that's what's acting as the radiant heater, and when you turn the gas up and down, that's how you control the heat level. And it's actually a pretty nice design. If you forget and just try to light it through the hole, it will just through this hole right here, it'll just shoot a flame out the side, and that won't be a good situation. So now that it's running, I'm going to actually use my trusty Ames. I reviewed this earlier. I don't have a 9-volt, so I have a special little power supply. One of these guys here is designed to replace a battery when you're testing battery tools, and we're going to see. These kind of infrared tools don't work super great on small objects. I'm sure this thing's a lot hotter than because this is kind of getting an average. And I don't want it to get too close because I don't want to burn up the tool itself. So that's the one issue with infrared thermometers, is they're basically useless when you have small objects like this. I need to use a contact type thermometer. This little set that it came with also has like a little sponge that you would put with water so you can wipe the soldering tip down. But you just grab it, and it works surprisingly well. Let's say if we were going to remove these wires here. If I can get this thing to focus, there we go. Let's see if we have enough heat. Oh, easily. Bam. I've actually been needing to remove the wires off of this little unit here. Get that out of the way. The only trick to doing this is making sure you have some kind of situation where you can get tension on the wire, so once you melt the solder, you can pull the wire out just like so. So as you can see, this is like 16 gauge wire on a PCB and just using the electronics tip. And I'm probably running it too hot. I'm at level 2 out of 4 levels, so about 25% of the way up on the fuel gauge. There we go. And as you can see, even if I didn't keep quite all the soldering operations in frame, that it has no problem performing those functions. I'll turn that off. And that's what's been so beautiful about this. I want to use this thing most of the time. just because it heats up so fast and just has such a tremendous amount of energy. But soldering tips, because they run at the temperatures, they wear out, they get eaten away. And so I try to only use it when I actually need to use a cordless soldering iron or a gas-based soldering iron. But I just wanted to show that as far as how these tools, the conceptions that they may have had, let me zoom out a little bit here, they work a lot better than you think, at least these BenzOmatic ones. And there'll be a variety of situations, especially if you're doing electrical work, where they'll really make it a lot easier for you, especially if you're using a small plug-in iron and it just isn't producing enough heat for you, or any kind of situation where you have to like dig up an extension cord. I mean, it just really, really surprising how handy these things are. Probably one of the biggest Achilles heels is if you're in sub-freezing temperatures, then the butane isn't going to want to evaporate very forcefully, and it will have low output until your hand kind of warms up the bottle, and then its temperature will increase. And the other caveat, of course, is because it's cordless, you kind of want to use it and then just get in the habit of putting it away. And no, this thing takes 5 or 10 minutes to cool off. Easily 5 minutes. You know, if you blow on it and pull off the tip, it'll cool off a little bit faster. But that's another thing to keep in mind. Anyway, I just kind of wanted to bestow the virtues of the BenzOmatic cordless butane-powered soldering iron. And until next time, Catus Maximus out. Oh, and I even forgot to ask people to subscribe, so I'll do that now too. Thanks again.